So guys, welcome back to the Kirk Miller Podcast. Today I have someone I've known a very long time. How long would you say, James?
Maybe 2009, 2010?
2009. In fact, you were the first person to ever interview me.
Oh,
Do my
yes,
first ever interview.
Yeah,
right?
you brought that up before, haven't you? Yeah.
Yeah, we did. For anyone who wants to watch an embarrassing moment of me.
And me.
I don't know about that, mate.
Yeah.
You were asking quite, constructive questions. But if anyone who wants to watch me being embarrassed, but through my own inability to talk, then Google Kirk Miller, James Collier interview, and you'll see me.
On YouTube, yeah.
Was it just after I won the men's health
Yeah.
competition, wasn't it? And you came to Future Fitness,
Yeah.
one of my first ever gyms, and you'll see James interviewing me. So we go back a long way.
Yeah, you believe the inability to talk has changed, hasn't it, from you?
Yeah, we go back a long way. But
Yeah.
look, James, the journey you've been on is absolutely incredible. I say an entrepreneur, but you don't really call yourself an entrepreneur at all, do you? But
And we can
for
talk
someone
about
who,
that.
yeah, exactly. But the subject that we're going to unpack today is something that I believe is a global issue and also creates a hell of a lot of confusion, and that is the subject of nutrition, James.
Yep.
Right? And James, for those of you who don't know him, is the co-founder of Huel, and that's got to be one of the fastest growing companies.
One of the fastest growing food businesses in the UK ever.
Yeah, if not the world right now, right? It's insane, the growth. But also, and this is the book I've got with me, for those of you listening, it is called Well Fed, How Modern Diets Are Failing Us and What We Can Do About It. So not only do I want to talk about your journey, James, from how it started to Huel to all your beliefs around food, but also some pretty ballsy claims in this book, which is called Well Fed, and there'll be a link to this in the show notes afterwards. But James, I'm just going to shoot straight from the hip to start, okay? One of the first sentences in this book was, everything we know about food and nutrition is wrong. It's time to unlearn it. That's a big, big statement.
Mm-hmm.
Where did that come from?
Well, that came from HarperCollins, my publisher, that statement. They did the blurbs around it.
Yep.
Obviously, the main book was me and the intros, etc. But what that point's trying to make is, look, in the West, let's talk philosophy for a moment, if we may, because it's kind of relevant to where I'm going to go with this. In the West, we have this sort of individualistic culture that so philosophers tell us, where the individual is the centre of our thinking. We're very me-focused. There's a libertarian mindset where we have personal goals, we try and better ourselves, and we're the priority of our thinking. More Eastern cultures, I'm told, are more collectivist, where it's more the we that's important. They think about the social group. Now, what I've tried to do in the book is take away from the me a little bit and try to get people to accept the we. Because a phrase I like to use is, we are bigger than ourselves. Because the way we're thought is, what we eat affects us. How does it affect us? How do our food choices affect our physical health, our performance? That's key to one of the things you talk about, and our mental health as well, and that's something you like to talk about. Mm-hmm. But what's been neglected, at least in the same consideration, is sustainable nutrition, and what we eat affects the planets and others around us, and also the ethics of what we eat. Now, the word ethics is up for interpretation, and we should talk about that in a bit. What I deem as ethical, you might have a different opinion on. Mm-hmm. So I came up with this strategy back in sort of 2020, during the pandemic, when I was bored and started writing, called Contemplative Nutrition, where I have the different pillars. So it's how what we eat affects ourselves, sustainable nutrition, and ethics. But as I was writing the book, I realised that we should separate out the physical and the mental. So I had 4 pillars. But then I got further into the book, I actually realised there's a 5th pillar. And that's not what we eat so much, but it's more how we eat and who we eat with. It's the concept of meals, the concept of sharing our food with others. And there's some really, really cool physiology behind that and how it affects us and our mental well-being. So what I've tried to do in Well Fed is marry all those concepts together. There's loads of books, thousands of books about how what we eat affects us physically.
Mm-hmm.
There's quite a few on sustainable nutrition. There's a few on ethics and animal farming methods and human rights, etc. But what I've tried to do is put them all into one bucket, because every food choice we make has to consider has to bear in mind multiple considerations simultaneously. And that's what I'm trying to do with contemplative nutrition. However, there's a reason that the first two pillars are what we eat for our physical health and mental health. Because a phrase I use in the book is, a diet isn't sustainable if it can't sustain an individual. If you're not in good health yourself, how can you look after other people? Mm-hmm. So it's important, yes, we consider other things, we consider others in the environment, but we must also prioritise our own health.
Awesome. I want to unpack everything today, James, all these pillars and these beliefs and the ethics and all that type of stuff. But what I'm always curious, when someone is so passionate about a certain subject, whether it's what I do, what you do, and the many guests that have been on, why is this all important to you? Where did it come from? Was it anything in particular, childhood? And forgive me, this might have nothing to do with it, but I want to hopefully probe with stuff that hasn't been asked before. But I noticed you said in this book, it was dedicated to your mother.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, the reason, there's a few things on there. Why is this important?
Yeah.
But let's maybe talk about why I probably got into nutrition in the first place.
Exactly.
And I put that down to two reasons. One is, you just mentioned my mum, and when I was 8 years old, she was diagnosed with what I later found out to be terminal breast cancer. First time I'd heard the C word as an 8-year-old, so my parents had to explain about a lump on her breast and what she was going to have to go through through the health service. But she had the operations and was treated and did okay, but she then chose to change her lifestyle, be more mindful, meditation, which is something I didn't really pay much attention to back then, who does, and also eat better and eat a vegetarian diet and take some supplements. Now, some of these supplements and tonics she did are things I now try and fight against. They're things that are highly questionable. However, there was a lot of focus on good food choices, a lot of focus on choosing healthy foods. Dad and me, we didn't go vegetarian, but we definitely had a lot more plant foods in our diet. And there was a lot of talk about good nutrition and how it affects us. So I put that down to one of the reasons that I did nutrition. The other was that I was bullied as a kid. I was skinny, had to run around in the shower to get wet. And it really bothered me. And I'm sure a lot of kids were bullied, and it affected them. But for some reason, it affected me deeply, and I still think I struggle with some of those demons today. And I went to a private school, so I won't say it was very physical all the time, although it definitely was sometimes. But it was just verbal put-downs all the time, and Collier, you're the weak one, and stuff like that. And it really bothered me. So when I was 16, one of my best friends, still one of my best friends today, a couple of years older than me, he'd started lifting heavy things. So I thought, that sounds like a good idea. I saw he sprouted some little arms. I thought, I want a bit of that. And he got me training, and then I went to another gym. Yeah. I think, when I was 16. And I've not looked back since. And I just wanted to get bigger. And so when I did my A-levels and did quite well in my A-levels, and it was time to go to uni, do I do economics, the sensible choice, because I just got an A in my A-levels, or do I do nutrition and go with my passion? And I went with my passion, and it probably turned out it was the right thing to do. But there was a few years ago, just before Huel, I was thinking, did I make that right turning in life? Because other businesses weren't doing so well, and I could have been a rich city boy and probably fat and overweight and all that stereotype, and getting drunk every night after the stressful day. But look, it turns out I did make the right choice. So, I wanted to, I followed my passion, worked hard and did it diligently. I think I did. Mm-hmm. And this is where I've ended up.
Mm. Did you get met with resistance at all? When you made that decision to go knee deep into nutrition?
No,
was your parents still
around?
No,
they were very supportive. They wanted me to do what I wanted. They're just happy I was going to uni, because I had a year out. I worked for a year before I went. Yeah, I was in 2 mines, and so they were very happy. And Mum actually saw me get to uni, and she died at the end of my first year at uni. So she, that was great that she saw me get there and study nutrition.
Yeah. How much impact do you think, because if your mum got cancer at 8, and she survived that or managed it.
Yeah,
I'm guessing.
about 11 years.
Yeah, 11 years. How much of that do you believe was down to the food she put in her mouth?
You couldn't say. I'd be guessing. Look, the health services back in the 80s, and that was fabulous. I mean, there's no getting away from it.
Yeah.
But making food choices and positive mindset probably helped. You can't put figures on these things.
No. But would you say she had more chance of potentially?
Well, if you live a bad lifestyle, that's really not going to help. So it definitely increases your odds. It's all about, making good food choices, plant-rich diets, which we can talk about later on.
Yeah.
And it was, definitely instilled some positive mindsets. My parents were both in business together. So
what business was that, if you don't mind me asking?
It was two things, really. One was to do with machinery and technology to make glass fibre products, like tables and toilet seats and stuff like that, which led my dad to travel the world because he'd sell the machinery and the technology and then go and set them up, and and that was part of the deal. And then another one was filler pastes. They, like wood fillers and stuff like that, and car body fillers and So when I was probably too young to work, my parents had me working for £1 an hour filling tins of filler paste in a factory, but I was made up, right?
Yeah. So you become qualified in nutrition.
Yeah.
Then what? Because obviously Huel didn't happen till way down the line. What was the career path after that?
So I went, did what most dietetics graduates do, and went and worked in the NHS as a clinical dietitian for several years. So I worked a couple of hospitals, 7 years all told. The latter years I was a good boss, and she let me go part-time because I wanted to set up as a freelance dietitian consulting, and I started doing that. And this was 1999. So this was before the internet had really, people were using the internet. So most of it was face-to-face advice. And it didn't really take off because I live in rural Northamptonshire and have to drive, 40 minutes for an appointment, for 40 minutes and drive back. You make, for 50 quid, it's a lot of travelling and petrol money for not a lot. So I then started muscletalk.co.uk, which was...
I remember that. I did an interview on that. Was that the interview that I did?
Yeah. We started that as a forum first, me and my colleague Jason, and... and that took off really well.
That went big, didn't it?
It went big for the time. It was before social media, and it was a forum when people were using forum. We hit the time right, and it went pretty big. It gave me and him both a modest monthly income from advertising revenue or selling some services, and then I carried on doing the consulting as well. So now I can't make the claim to be the first person ever to do online diet advice, but I can say I've yet to come across anybody that did it sooner than me. I saw my first online client in 2000.
Oh, it's like 25 years, and obviously online training has exploded since.
Yeah, and everybody's doing it now, and I don't want to do it anymore. I still get requests now, and I can't. I can't turn clients away. So Muscle Talk took off, and I was always consulting in the background. And I would do things like seminars, writing for consumer press. Meal plans for care homes. That was a nice little bit of work. Sometimes we'd go and review the plans and make sure that the residents are having adequate nutrition. And for the care home owners, that was good because it meant they know they were doing something, they were right. And then a bit of product development. And then in June 2014, I got the email from Julian Hearn, who's the principal founder of Huel, saying he had this great idea. Did you know
Julian?
No, he found me.
Just literally out the blue.
Yeah, he Googled me and found me, and I think he found a couple of other nutritionists and commissioned me to come up with an initial recipe, which was the white pouch powder. It's changed a bit since, but more or less the main ingredients are the same. And then a year later we launched, and Julian said on the day we launched, "Do you want to be my co-founder?" Yes, please. Best conversation I ever had, life-changing email. And that was June 2015 we launched. So we were a year playing around with it before we actually launched, and we were trying to use my contacts in the supplement world and to find someone to blend it for us. And then it scaled really quite quickly. And in fact, I was getting married just after we launched. We launched in June. I was getting married in August, and then I went on honeymoon just after that. And I was sitting on the beach, and I said to my wife, I think this business is going to go somewhere. Look at the attention we're getting when I'm just off for 2 or 3 weeks. And it went from there,
Wow. So that it just shows you, doesn't it? I mean, the delayed gratification and all that work you've been putting in for 15, 20, 25 years, maybe longer, forgive me if I'm wrong, for that to happen, because that didn't happen by chance. Obviously, all the work you'd done, the talks, the writing, must have...
put the name out there, and I'm learning knowledge. And as you know, Kirk, when I was in the bodybuilding, when I wasn't just doing nutrition, I was doing show promotion and had the clothing company.
Yes, I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, the one with Matt's Clothing and stuff. And trying to be an entrepreneur and in these.
So you dip your toe in a fair bit.
And Muscle Talk, I'd say, was a success. It wasn't a massive success, but it gave Jason and me a modest monthly income. So that was the consultancy turned out to be a success because the consultancy led to Huel and obviously Huel. But the other products, I had the show promotions, the clothing, the tanning products, etc. They were flops. Being realistic here, I was a busy fool in many senses.
When you first started Huel, then you'd gone from having nutrition pretty much as even though it was a business element to it with your consulting and stuff, but it's very much still passion focused for sure. When you then started going deeper into the business world and the partnership with Julian, what were the biggest challenges for you on that?
I was still doing some of the other things for the first couple of years. My other projects, they hadn't really wound down. Julian's a very strong character, and he's the principal founder and I'm co-founder. Yeah. So he is the entrepreneur.
I understand.
And he'd already made some money on a previous business, already been successful. And I found, although the other businesses hadn't done very well, and I did have a business partner, I was kind of always the boss. Having someone who's a very dominant personality, I found quite challenging in that. And also, both of us were doing things that we're not out of our comfort zone. He's from a marketing background, so marketing, he's all over. I'm from a nutrition background, it's all over. But I remember one day I was working on some formulas or articles for the website, and it was in the very early days. He had one girl working for him out of a little tiny unit that he'd hired in Aylesbury. And basically from morning till night, they were packing parcels between them. He was doing no business. And so Julian called me up and said, just down tools from what you're doing. I need you just to find me a fulfillment centre. So I had to hustle and find a logistics centre to do the picking and packing and sending for us. And within 3 days, I'd found one. And we signed about a week later. So then, and we moved all the stock over there, quick. And that allowed him and the girl to do proper work to try and push the business forward. But when you've got that many parcels coming in and someone's got to pack them.
So literally started like that to where it is now.
Yeah.
And what was the initial mission and vision between you and Julian? Or did that take a while to figure out?
It took a while to figure out, really. It was just, I think Julian very much led things. I did the nutrition and the product side. Yeah. But he very much led what he wanted. He wanted we've still got the forum, the Huel forum now, discuss.huel.com, where people ask questions. That was there from the beginning. Great move, that was.
Why?
Because you get a community of avid hooligans, as we now call them. Didn't call them back then.
Yes.
And they're very much focused. And we got this from the early stages and with a bit of PR and people very much immersed in the brand. And that was cool. And I think that's, I don't want to misrepresent Julian, but I think that was what he wanted initially. Just, a bit of revenue from a bit of making a product that people could get behind. And then he realised, actually, this could be a lot bigger than this. And it grew from there, and we developed other products. Yeah. Most people will be familiar with our RTD, the ready-to-drink, the bottles.
I had 2 this morning.
I had 2 this morning, too. That's great.
He hasn't paid me to say that, by the way.
Because they're in all the shops nationwide, and also in some American stores now, and
airports.
Airports in some parts of Europe as well, like Germany, for instance. But that actually took us a good 2.5 years extra to develop just that product, because we had a powdered product originally, and how can we get this formula into a bottle with the technology, with a long shelf life and to taste good? And that was challenging. We had drinks developers, some of them didn't work out. Eventually we found some that did, and then eventually we progressed and did it in-house. And we still have those bottles manufactured obviously by third parties, because that technology there is very specialist, although we do the new product development and the new flavour development in-house, in our kitchen, in our HQ.
Yeah, and we've been in the industry a long time.
Yeah.
And there's been lots of supplement brands that have started and failed. There's lots of supplement brands still here. Especially your passion of nutrition and knowing what works, what doesn't. A lot of evidence to back up what you say. What was your point of difference?
Huel isn't a supplement, it's a food.
Okay.
And we get called a meal replacement. I get it. People like the term. We're actually not keen on the term meal replacement. Let me explain why. If I say, Kirk, what are you having for dinner tonight? Are you having spaghetti bolognese, or are you going to replace it with pizza? It just doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
You'd say, I'm having spaghetti bolognese or pizza or Huel. So the category is complete foods.
Okay.
Okay, so they are meals or snacks that have got complete nutrition. Now, what does that term mean? And people will rightly be challenging that. Isn't food a complex?
Explain that for someone who hasn't got a clue.
It's complex. So it is food. Broadly speaking, it contains all in a per portion contains pro rata all the essential nutrients in adequate amounts according to the recommended daily amounts of that region, or if there's science to back it up, it's different from that. And that's the macronutrients, the protein, fats, carbs and fibre, and the micronutrients, the vitamins and minerals. For instance, we've got more vitamin C or more vitamin D than the recommended daily amounts because there is a need for that. And then we've got different products that have different macro ratios, i.e. the ratio of proteins to carbs to fats might be a bit different. But all our products have all good amounts of all the essential vitamins and minerals. They've got the right combination of proteins because all products are plant-based, suitable for vegans. So there's a bit of a challenge there that vegans have to have good quality proteins that are both got all the essential amino acids and are digested in an efficient way. So that's where you combine the different proteins. Then you've got slow-release carbs. All the products are high in fibre. We're in a fibre crisis globally at the moment. Fibre is really, really important. And then the other thing I'm really proud of is the essential fats, the omega-3s. We've got good amounts of essential omega-3s from plant sources at the levels that will convert to the more active forms of the omega-3s in the body. So we've tried to cover everything, even some phytonutrients, which are all the good stuff from plants that might have antioxidant effects. So we've tried to cover everything. Obviously, the nutritional quality of each product varies due to just what people want. And so we've got like the Black Edition powder and more recently the Black Edition bottles, which have got a different protein levels.
It's higher protein.
Yeah, higher protein, and the Black Edition powder is lower in carbs and higher in protein and higher in essential fats, with good amount of fibre and different sources. And people have options, and they can choose. Because one thing in the first couple of years of Huel that sort of what I was less comfortable with was we only had the white pouch powder, and Huel was great. It ticked a lot of boxes, but one thing it wasn't was flexible. But as soon as you add another powder, like the Black Edition powder to that, you haven't just got two choices. You've got several choices because people can combine one scoop of each. And that really works well because there's more flexibility of what people want or people need for their nutrition.
Based on what they have in the rest of their day. And I know that's been, for me as well, James, like if I know, for example, this morning I'm back to back, I'm filming podcasts, I'm busy, I'll have two of the white bottles because I can get 40 grams of protein, and it's like me having some oats in a bowl with some protein powder, but it's like the equivalent of a bottle. I haven't got to make it or carry a Tupperware around with me. Equally, sometimes if I know I'm going to be lower on protein, James hasn't paid me to say this, by the way, right? If I know lower on protein, but I'm going to have plenty of calories for the rest of the day, then I'll have the black one. They are really, really handy. So simply put, would you say, James, and I've got my opinion on this, so I don't want to put my opinion in your mouth here, that it's one of the best possible options out there, that if you cannot physically sit down and eat an actual meal, which a lot of people might be listening to this and go, okay, yeah, but you should be eating real food every meal. Like, I'm a big advocate of that, but if you physically can't do that within your day and it's not complementary within your day, then this is a phenomenal option, surely.
Look, I've mentioned a few minutes ago about the fifth pillar of contemplative nutrition, social eating. Okay, I don't want to take anything away from that. This whole what's real food, eat real food. Well, okay, we define real food. That's another debate, right? There's no definition of it.
Yeah, I want to unpack that.
Which is, but okay, I get it. It's not food that you eat on a plate with a knife and fork and share it, and it's great. And wherever possible, you should do that. You could try and source your ingredients ethically, again up for interpretation, with a low environmental impact and obviously nutritious, and prepare food together with other people and then enjoy food together. And if you can do that, brilliant. And if you can do that for 3 meals a day, brilliant. How many people do you know that do that? So what we offer, Huel, is the best plan B. And that's great. And there are absolutely some people out there that Huel is not for them. And that's brilliant. but most people could find a place for Huel in their diet, because for those meals, hopefully not many of them, where you are busy. And then there are some people that have just not been taught cooking skills. That's not their fault. They weren't taught it. Maybe they come from single parent families who their parents came from single parent families, and they just weren't given those skills, and they were brought to be self-sufficient. And self-sufficient mean having a bit of money to go and get a cheap takeaway or a cheap meal, pre-prepared meal from the shop. So offering something to people who aren't who don't have the advantages of, I'm not just talking about financial here, but I'm talking about ability. Mm-hmm. So that's what we offer. Of course, people, we can talk about, what we should be doing from top down, what government should be doing to try and change this. But the fact is, at the moment, it's not there. And also, we've got increasing pressures of the food system, which is something else we can talk about with food.
Such as, tell me more about what
we know that the carbon emissions and climate change is a real big problem, and we know that the food industry is maybe 25 to 30% of carbon emissions. Then we've got problems of land use and over water use, and all the resources that are involved in there. So if we know that meat-rich diets are the biggest contributor to the carbon emissions. And one of the simplest things people can do is change the way they eat. Now, we can talk about my strategy of contemplative nutrition. We should come to that at some point. But part of that is I'm not a vegan, but we can reduce the amount of meat we have. That's what I'm trying to do. There's a movement called the reducitarianism, which I do talk about in Well Fed, where people are just trying to get people to reduce the amount of meat they have. So I've reduced a few years ago, 2019, through Huel and through learning about the impact of the food system on our food choices, that we should be having less animal-derived ingredients. So I cut mine to about 10% of my calories come from animals. Now, for perspective, the Western average is about 28 to 30%. So I cut it about 2/3. What does that look like? Mm-hmm. 2 or 3 days a week, maybe have almost zero animal calories. At meals, have smaller portions of meat and bigger portions of plant-based proteins. So to use an analogy that rolls off the tongue well, chicken and chickpeas. Mm. You've got your meat protein, and then you've got your legumes. Mm. Now, I'm not advocating people should go, fully vegan or fully plant-based. People want to do that, great. You can do it these days. Mm. So the impact of what we have is something we can change. Our food choice is something we can change, and that's a bigger thing than driving an electric car or making other lifestyle changes. Mm. And you can still enjoy food and have a highly nutritious diet. Of course. Mm. There's two things, other than making different food choices, there's two things you can do. One is, most of us eat too much food. So if you eat less food, whether it's plants or animals, that's going to have a lower environmental impact. Mm. And the other thing is, we've got so much food in the world, we're throwing a bunch of it away if people shop more efficiently. Now, people are so affluent these days that they can just buy food and throw it away. In our grandparents' generation, even our parents' generation, that was unheard of. You didn't, and then of course exploiting an animal for food is one thing, but exploiting an animal just to throw it away, that strikes me as very morally questionable. So you have to. What I'm trying to do is bring in sort of physiological considerations about our food choice, as well as behavioural and social and even philosophical considerations of food choice. So to bring that back to where we started, when you were talking about Huel being, a good, one of the best choices people can make. Yeah. Other than real food, well, it ranks up there. And we've got real problems with the food system. We've got 8.1 billion people and rising to feed. Most of us are very narrow-minded in this me-centric world. And I'm not criticising people. I'm not passing judgment. I'm just commenting on. But we all just think about us and our immediate bubble. But there are other people in different parts of the world that are struggling to make food choices. Don't even have to go out this country. We've had a cost of living crisis. I don't know if we're out of it or not yet. I'm not well versed in that area. But we do know that people struggle, and they're making otherwise bad food choices that are costing them a lot of money. If people can shop a bit more wisely and not throw food away, that's going to decrease the carbon emissions and also save people quite a lot of money. So I just want to try and encourage a bit more efficiency, things that were unheard of 40 years ago, and how people think about food.
Yeah, no, I understand. You said there about people not being able to shop efficiently. Do you think that comes down to just a basic lack of knowledge?
Lack of knowledge. It's not so much of a problem in the UK, but have you heard of the concept of food desert?
No.
So this is a big issue in some parts of America, and I've been told in some parts of London as well. So this is where the shops that are in your immediate vicinity that are relatively easy to access don't stock nutritious food like fruit and veg or fresh fruit and veg. And you can only get junk food and highly processed food. There's no choices. That's called a food desert, because if you're a shopkeeper and people aren't buying it, why are you going to stock it? Because it goes off in a few days. So that's the concept of food desert. So sometimes it's what's available. You know, people don't have the time or the resources. They have to take a couple of buses to go to a supermarket.
Yeah, and it's not practical.
And it's not practical. And in America, I'm told some of these small towns, they don't have any supermarkets that sell produce. They just have local stores that just sell less nutritious food. So people don't, you know, they don't know how to budget. When people aren't taught budgeting skills at school, so this is another concept. Yeah, it's such a fundamental part of life. So they don't know how to shop, and they don't have access to the right sorts of foods.
So what do?
They make otherwise bad food choices. There was a paper done a few years ago now. This was in the UK again. I think it was in one part of Essex. Could be wrong, but something like that. Where there was so many new fast food joints that were cropping up. The money spent and calories spent on fast food was shown to increase, and this was correlated with more socially deprived areas, where people on lower income areas. Okay. So that demonstrates that people of lower incomes are more likely to shop at takeaways. And if you live in a block of flats and there's a takeaway joint just downstairs, you can nip down there for £1.50. You can get a reasonable sized burger, and and then another 50p gets a small portion of chips. That's £2. You've got no preparation. You don't have to own a fridge, run a fridge. You don't have to use power to cook food. It's convenient, and you've got calories and a bit of protein. Very low fibre, very low amounts of vitamins and minerals. So, and we don't see this because we know how to shop. And even otherwise, maybe people are buying a microwave meal. Yep. You might have a little bit of token veg in the side panel there, cooking it in the plastic thing, which is another topic we could get onto. And just, not shopping correctly because they've not had the skills, don't have the budgeting skills or the shopping skills.
Just before we go deeper into the topics of the book, James himself, you mentioned there about, because I know there will be some vegetarians listen to this, and there'll be some people that potentially would want to explore eating less meat, for example.
Great.
If we're saying that, okay, we should eat less meat and have a bit more of a vegetarian protein-based option, but me playing devil's advocate with that as a coach sometimes, certainly with vegetarians, that usually speaking, the higher if we're trying to hit a relatively decent protein intake, which is required for building muscle and strength and curbing hunger and stuff, a lot of the time the protein sources from a vegetarian option will be higher in carbs and calories. So can that not create the other problem of, okay, well, if we're going more vegan or less meat, that it's harder to control your calories, which is obesity is a big problem in itself.
If they're buying more whole foods and high fibre foods, then they shouldn't be higher in calories. Sure, they might be slightly skew on the carb to protein ratio, but you can easily get ample protein. And if you combine the protein sources, which is what we've done at Huel, let me explain that now from a food perspective. Yeah. So we know that legumes like lentils and beans and stuff, great sources of protein, but they probably lack one of the more essential amino acids. I think in the case of legumes, I think it's phenylalanine. Is that right? Or have I got that wrong? If I've got that wrong, apologies, audience. But then they might combine it with rice, which, isn't a high protein source, but it has a reasonable amount of protein in it. Well, that will contain the phenylalanine, but lacks another essential amino acid called lysine. But then lysine is very prevalent in the legumes. So by combining the two foods, and having quite a decent portion, you've got quite a bit of carbs, but it's a very filling meal as well. So you're less likely to overeat. It's the hyperpalatability of most foods. It's the reason that people are consuming too many calories.
So for hyperpalatable food, palatable food, in layman's terms to the listener.
So very tasty, very easy to eat, a lot of food, very calorie dense, full of the lovely tasting sugars or lovely tasting fats, maybe a bit of salt on it. Typically low in fibre because it doesn't fill you up. The protein level might be moderate, but it might not be high. Because protein is satiating. Protein and fats are the most satiating of the macronutrients. Carbs typically and fats, you can easily get a lot of calories in. So of course, sugar is easy to eat. And different parts of the brain are stimulated as well for eating sugar. Look, here's one for you. Have you ever been out to a lovely restaurant? You've had a starter and a main course with the breads and you're stuffed. You can't eat another thing, right? And then say, oh, but fancy look at the dessert menu. Oh, go on, we'll just have a look. And you end up ordering something. You've just 10 minutes earlier said, I couldn't eat another thing. And yet you find room for that sweet tasting dessert. That's because a different part of the brain is stimulated. You've heard of dopamine.
Yes.
Which is one of the neurotransmitters that's about chasing down things that make you feel good. Yeah. Well, that targets a different part of the brain known as the striatum. And it's some of the work that's been looked at in people that have an obesity problem is actually that part of the brain might be more responsive to dopamine than in other people who don't have a weight problem. Okay, there's a lot to unpack there, but so it's really interesting that a different part of the brain is stimulating. You can't eat anything else, but yet you can find sugar. But if you trace this back to when we were hunter-gatherers and our ancestors, it makes sense, right? Let's say you'd had some food, you were out hunting for 24 hours, you'd found an antelope, killed it, cooked a bit of it, your backpack was full. I'm thinking one terms, but you were carrying a load back for the rest of the group. Oh, you come across some lovely pineapples on the way back. Well, you're going to shove as many in your mouth as possible, and then you can carry a few, but you want to shove as many as possible because by the time you get back and tell your campmates there's a load of pineapples there, all the baboons up the road would have eaten them, right? And there wouldn't be any left. So it was a chance, you had more of a survival advantage by stuffing your face with sweet pineapple. And this is now translates to modern food technologies that manipulate the way the way food tastes. So we want to crave it more.
How do they do that? Because what you've just shared is single-handedly probably the biggest reason why people are overweight and struggle to curb cravings.
Yeah.
Okay,
so it's the foods, a lot of the junk foods or so-called ultra-processed foods, which let's return to that point in a bit, but are made to be hyperpalatable. So they're fat, often got either a lot of fat or a lot of sugar in it, or sometimes both, because we crave those energy-dense foods. They're highly efficient forms of nutrition. Now, modern food technology has put them in certain proportions that stimulate one or the other, or often both, sometimes salt as well. Sweet and salt popcorn?
Yep.
Love it. And it's stimulating two different responses, which means you're more likely to eat more.
Doesn't fill you up.
It doesn't fill you up. That's the other thing. And Pringles, they actually used in their marketing campaign, once you pop, you can't stop.
That's true. I've never, James, I've never once opened a box of Pringles and not finished them.
Yeah, and they actually use that as a positive. I don't know if they're still doing that, and there's so much wrong with that marketing claim, right? They are just just energy dense, simple carb. The starch has been milled down, and so it's easy to digest. It's very easy on the mouth. The mouthfeel is very soft. I know they're crispy, but they're also soft. And they literally melt in the mouth. And they're high in fat as well, and salty. So they're literally made to stimulate the parts of the brain, 3 different parts of the brain. So once you pop, you can't stop. That's a good thing. And so there's a great example of how food's been manipulated for to get us to consume it, because capitalist incentives comes in and we buy more. Now, I'm not saying there's some ultra big food overlord up there that's trying to exploit us. It's capitalism. People invest in these companies. People like you and me have invested through pension schemes and other funds in these companies. So we're complicit. So there's no big... but it's just capitalism. Now, if we can change the way we think, and if we can change the way that food industry thinks and the food industry plans and makes more healthful foods, that people are desiring and spending their money on, then that's going to be a good thing. And this is why at the moment some of these companies are really worried about the GLP-1 agonists, the new weight loss drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy and Mounjaro, etc., because there's been some recent data, really interesting this, that showed that people are spending less money on some of these junk foods because
they're taking these.
Because the appetite's
they're not eating as much anymore.
So then the companies are now going to be investing. They're going to have to invest in other foods in other ways, and to try and encourage people to spend money. So this is where another possibly, and it's too early to tell yet, possibly positive effect of these drugs is going to change the way that companies produce food to address this issue, and then that means more healthful foods are going to be available because they need more micronutrition and more fibre in smaller foods, more satiating foods for lower calories.
Yeah.
So this could be a good thing. It's too early to tell. I realise there's a lot of me guessing going on here, but just looking at the early stages of the data. So we're led by, companies ultimately want to sell products.
Yes.
Looking at the bottom line, they've got to increase profits. They do that, and there's only a few ways they can do it. And one of those few ways is literally sell more products. If they can stimulate our brains to sell more, great. If there's other ways, so if you do object to these, you just don't buy the products.
But that might be easy to say, and for some people who like me and you, very easy to do.
Yeah, other people.
But if it was that simple, then why do we need the drugs?
Why do we need these drugs?
Yeah, why do we need the drugs? And also, if people have these emotional patterns and desires to buy these things that have got these nice colours and smells and are super hyper palatable, how do they break that pattern?
It's really.
I know it's very open ended.
This is a real, and there's it's why I love the stuff you do, Kirk, because you have quite a lot of male followers. Am I correct? Yeah, about
80%.
80%, yeah, and a lot of them are focused on improving themselves. But one thing you don't do that some other people that might sit in, I don't want to insult you here, in a similar space to you, they lead with this sort of thing. Like people are just being lazy. If you can't, if you can't not eat so much food, you're just being greedy or lazy. You get and I hate that sort of.
Doesn't solve the problem.
It doesn't solve the problem. And
if anything, I think it enhances the problem because people have this rebellious nature that they've probably been called that as a kid. If you look even deeper, lazy, you're fat, you're this. So they're going to live that label.
Yeah, and have you heard of this term food noise?
Yes.
Yeah, but let me explain for some of the audience.
Yeah, please.
So it's been known for a while now that there's a certain amount of genes that are associated with more people that are more predisposed to being obese, but almost all of them are actually linked to appetite and cravings and the propensity to eat, or on the flip side, lack of satiation, lack of feeling full. So we know there's a strong genetic component. We also know there's a strong, possibly epigenetic component. Now, epigenes are things that's little proteins or other factors that are associated with genes that switch them on. Slight off topic for a moment, just to qualify that. Yeah. Is every cell has the same genome, but our eye cell, for instance, is different to a skin cell because the different epigenes are switching these different cells on and off. Now, we know that some of the epigenes might turn on some of these genes that are associated with this thing called food noise. Now, food noise is where people are constantly thinking about food and their next meal. We all get it a bit. If we haven't eaten for a while, we're thinking about what's our next meal going to be. But some people, literally half an hour after they finished a meal, might have more food noise than other people. So we know there's a high propensity of some people to have more food noise.
Just from their genes?
From genes, and also from maybe the way they were brought up, or things that happened phenotypically while they were in the mother's womb as well. It's a really interesting area of development there.
Yeah. I'm all for this.
So we can't control that. It's no one's fault. We can say, well, just man up and. I find it really frustrating and annoying because now if you're someone that's got food noise, you'll have come across some of these people. They've struggled with their weight the whole of their adult life.
They've called themselves a foodie. To give you some context, I've always been a foodie. I love food.
Yeah, and they're even labelling themselves. Which
yes.
Is some, and they've struggled probably from a teenager, and they've tried dieting maybe tens, maybe even hundreds of times, and they've achieved a bit and then failed, and then they're told by some dickhead on social media who's buff that they're lazy. They're the opposite of lazy to me. They are. These people have tried again and failed, yet they keep trying and trying again to lose weight. They're trying to exercise, but they're doing it with a constant ringing in their in their ear of food noise, thinking about food, which is, I don't have that, I do sometimes, but not all the time. So I think some people are trying really, really hard. Now, this is where the GLP-1 agonists, the drugs, come in. And let me just briefly explain what they are. People may have heard of Ozempic or Wegovy or Mounjaro. There's a hormone in the body that's associated with feeling fullness called GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1. There are a bunch of other ones as well. And these drugs have been shown to promote the release of GLP-1, and they're originally used for diabetes control because it helps insulin regulation, glucose regulation through working with insulin. But they were more recently found, just post-pandemic really, that actually they suppress appetite, and they've now been marketed. So Ozempic and Wegovy are technically the same compound, semaglutide, but Ozempic is the form that's sold for diabetes. Wegovy is the form that's sold for weight loss, that's licensed for weight loss. Essentially the same compound, which is why there's a big black market for Ozempic. And then Mounjaro is actually a compound called tirzepatide, which is sold for diabetes control, and its sister compound is Zepbound, that's going to be released, if it hasn't already. I'm not sure if it's been licensed yet. That's for weight loss, but it's tirzepatide. Now, tirzepatide has been shown to be, I think, and I don't want to fudge these numbers, so nobody shout at me when they're listening to this. I think it's 15% more effective than semaglutide, because it also works not only with GLP-1, but it works with GIS, which is, don't ask me to say what that is another another satiation hormone. So it's more effective. What they do is they've shown to turn down the food noise. So it's only when you're genuinely hungry and you haven't eaten for some time that you might start thinking about food. And people that are on the drugs eat their meal and they feel full up pretty quickly. Now, some people are not using these correctly. There's a big problem with people that aren't getting the drugs through their practitioners, through their doctors.
Yep.
I've been told this is an unofficial statistic, but in the UK, I think it's only about 2 or 3% of people on these GLP-1 agonists are actually getting them in association with their doctors. So they're getting them either from these regulated pharmacies, where at least they're buying the real deal, that you just literally have to show a before and after picture with your weight or something, some of them. It's that easy to get. Or from the black market, where they don't know what they're getting. They could be getting legit Ozempic, or they could be getting a counterfeit where they don't know the dose. Now, people think on the black market people might be underdosing. No, they quite often overdose in per mil of the active compound, because they want a reputation of being stronger. So they sell more product. Now, so it could be the case that a lot of people on these GLP-1 agonists are actually taking too much, and they're feeling tired because they're not eating properly. And so if you're tired and not eating properly, what's one thing you're not going to want to do? Exercise.
Yeah, and move.
And
then that's going to impact your mood.
And we know that, so people are getting muscle wasting.
Yep.
Now, but there are people that are controlled environments where they're taking the right dose of these drugs, and they're still exercising, and they're structuring their eating properly, and they're doing really well. They're not losing muscle, they're losing fat, they're feeling great. But how many people are doing that? And there's been some deaths linked to these drugs. But obviously that's been, people ask me, am I in favour of the drugs or not? I can't answer that question. I can't answer it, because broadly speaking, am I glad they're out there and they're genuinely helping people? Absolutely. Of course I am.
But does that not, James, obviously this is great, and I knew this would veer off in a certain direction, but I feel this is why it's great to have someone who clearly knows this stuff about food top to bottom, and you understand the deeper aspects of people's lifestyle factors and emotional patterns, all this stuff. What's the word? My argument against these are, having coached a lot of people who overeat, unless you change that person's lifestyle or person's ability to manage that lifestyle, or the emotional patterns, help rewire those emotional patterns that cause people's decision making to overeat, rich sugar, processed food, or whatever is causing them to overeat. If you don't change that, do you need to reside to the fact that you're going to have to stay on these injections for a long time? Because, James, I've had clients come to me, bottomless pockets, and we live in a world now where people want the quick fix, don't they, in everything, whether it's business, whether it's body, whether it's whatever. And they've took the injections, they've lost weight for a month, 2 months, 3 months, however long they've been on it. Then the moment they come off them, hasn't changed those emotional patterns, hasn't changed their lifestyle, hasn't changed their peer group. And we talk about environment and people you spend time with that influence the habits in the first place. So then eventually they put the weight on or worse.
Okay, I can respond to that, see if you agree or not.
Okay.
There are two probably groups there that might not fit into that sort of group, two sort of groups of people that might not fit into that. One is there are people that have tried all that and it's just not helped, and they're just not losing weight. They're at risk of chronic disease long term.
Yep.
If they have to use these long term, so be it.
Okay.
There's going to be both. There's going to be chances are these people are going to live longer. Sure. Then some people say, yeah, but there's been deaths linked to them. Yeah, but how many deaths would there be if people are not using these drugs? Who are we to deny these people, this cohort? Don't know who these.
If they've tried everything.
Yeah. And there's a caveat here. I'm not saying they should get it from either the black market or these reputable online pharmacies. It should be used in conjunction with your doctor. We also know there's going to be cost savings more socially to the NHS and to health service from using these, because the cost of keeping people well is actually cheaper than chronic disease. So we know there's benefits there. But there's another group as well, and this is probably where it could work for some of the people you describe. If they're used correctly and people aren't taking too much, and while they're taking them, they could be a tool for people to use to help them address these multiple issues that you've described. A tool to help them control their appetite, a tool to help them get down, drop a bit of weight, and to help them have a bit more energy, because they're not lugging this heavy body around, to get into to some good habits. Habit forming is a big thing, as I know you're on board with here, that can support them longer term while they address some of these emotional issues as well. Because sometimes if you're weighed down literally with your body weight, that could be quite an emotional burden as well. So this is where it's not black and white, what we're for or against. It's complex. I'm very concerned about these drugs being misused. I'm very happy that they're available for people who can benefit from them. And if people want, I know one lady, a good friend of ours, who feels much better on them, but she's getting tireder sooner in the day. Now, I know that she's getting them from the black market. And what's the dose she's having? Should she be taking a bit less? Possibly.
Yeah.
So there's lots to think about here. And they can be a useful tool.
Yeah, they can. Just to wrap that up, one thing I do feel strongly about, you never, say if I look at my demographic, James, of people, if you're trying to build a really strong muscular physique, you're never going to do that on weight loss jabs.
Yeah, you're not, because you're not have the energy for it.
No chance.
And also, that's I agree.
You just can't. All right, let's get a little bit deeper into the book, mate. You say, part one, the truth about the food system. And I know we've covered a few things indirectly already. You talk about the imperfect food system. What's the single biggest failure of the current system?
Inequalities.
Tell me more.
So, well, we know that people, why is it some people, we know that chronic disease, non-communicable diseases like heart disease, strokes, cancers, Alzheimer's, arthritis, etc. We know it's more so generally associated with lower economic groups. The food system, like for the reasons we've spoke about, people are having the wrong types of food. Different demographics are having access. As more affluent, or at least well above the poverty line, you can make better food choices. Now, is that just an association, or is it a consequence? It's probably both. You're not being taught how to shop properly, like we've discussed. You're not being taught how to budget, and therefore, and you probably don't have as well paid a job. Maybe they'll play into each other, but there, inequalities are.
So you're basically saying that the food system has made it harder that if you don't earn a bit more money, or
you don't have access. Yeah, exactly.
Then you've
choice.
Got,
but and also education. You're not being educated. Food preparation, budgeting, we've already spoke about.
Yeah. If I'm a just in the nature of the demographic of generally people listen to this, high performing business owner, entrepreneur, or even athlete listen to this. Again, quite a controversial question maybe. Why should I care?
It's not for me to judge whether someone should care or not. I try to care. Maybe my actions don't demonstrate that I do sometimes.
I think they do, mate.
Yeah, that's not for me to say. You don't have to care. Nobody's obliged to care. But if we live in we're social creatures as humans. We're not individual. This is the thing again.
Yeah.
And I just want to caveat something. I wasn't clear enough earlier. You know, I spoke about individualism and collectivism and why we should be a little bit more we focused, a little bit more me focused. I'm glad I've grown up in an individualist culture, you know, with a striving to be better, and I'm glad. But not to say that we should completely shun the we focused mindset. Let's embrace it a little bit more. Still be me focused, but embrace the we as well. Our actions, like it or not, will affect others around us. And we might not care about that.
But indirectly, it'll come back to us at some point.
Yeah, well, people might say, "Well, I'll be dead." Okay, that's the other one I get. Well, why should I care? Well, you don't have to care. I'm not. You know, if you have kids, you probably, if you want to, you know, you probably should care. I know. But it's not for me to say whether someone should care or not. That's up to them.
I understand. And then you talk about nutritional misinformation a lot.
We're going down that one, aren't we?
Yes.
Do that one.
Yes. What's the most harmful misinformation still being pushed by mainstream health? It's fitness media.
It's the mindset. It's the food fear-mongering and the absolutist thinking that I'm worried about. So there's a lot of different sort of archetypes of misinformation on social media.
Yep.
You know, it's very clickbait content. You've got 45 seconds, maybe 90 seconds at the most.
Or 4 seconds to get the hook.
And 4 seconds to get the hook. So you're doing this, they're lying to you. There's a concept I'm exploring at the moment. I'm writing a couple of pieces on, which hopefully be out in a few weeks, on nutritional populism. You know, the political mindset of populism that's embraced the world at the moment, how it manifests onto how we think about food. You know, there's a lot of people talking about the carnivore diet at the moment, and they're outside with their shirts off, looking ripped, looking good, saying they feel great. Who are we to question that? I worry about people following the carnivore diet.
Yeah, I do too. There's a doctor, I can't remember his name, he's quite a public figure.
Paul Saladino?
Yes. Yeah. I don't like it.
I don't. I'm not on board with it. I don't. This is a lot of misinformation, and let me explain why. So, just the carnivore point to begin with. It's not so much that meat is bad for you, although some academics might disagree with that. It's what you're not having. We spoke about fibre. You're not having the plant-rich diets. You're not. You know, we need the plants are for the microbiome, the healthy bacteria and archaea and viruses and fungi that live in our guts that work with us in a symbiotic relationship that help our digestion. We know they help cognition and clarity. And fibre, we need fibre for that. So it's what you're not having if you follow the carnivore diet. And I worry about them. You say, well, why should I worry? Well, why do I produce content at all? Why did I write the book? Because I care about other people. And you know, I would say to the carnivore that, you know, they might say, well, I feel great. I felt the best ever. My challenge back would be, yeah, but were you eating crap diet before and any good positive lifestyle changes and you're doing lots of exercise now? And you know, I can't, if they feel great, I can't tell them any different. But I would also say, if you're making that much of a drastic change with your body, have you done a full critical appraisal of the available evidence? Of course they haven't. Very few people are nerdy enough to do that. And why should they? They listen to some clickbait influencer. But
with a big following, and also the reason, I mean, look, I'm sure Paul deep down, look, he's got a huge following and there's lots of great stuff he probably puts out there. But my biggest pet hate I seen, James, was he put up his results from a DEXA scan. He was 10.7% body fat and he was attributing a large part of that down to the carnivore diet. Respectfully, James, and this isn't to gloat or comparison, I did a DEXA scan around the same time. It was lower body fat. I don't follow a carnivore diet. So one of my biggest pet hates, and I'd love your thoughts on this, is when people are trying to preach one set way, whether it's a carnivore diet, low carb, keto, whatever it is, like you're literally polarizing what's maybe worked for you onto an audience that probably have nowhere near the same knowledge. And because you're a trusted person, you've got the body, you've got the influence. And it just didn't sit well with me. It really didn't, because I had a better DEXA scans than him, but I don't
But
follow a carnivore diet.
you wouldn't, you might put it out there out of interest, but you're not doing it to put your views onto anyone else. And this is it. It's absolutist thinking. Now, you've got these influencers. Now, some of my more cynical colleagues that I respect might say these guys are doing it for financial reasons, to sell their services or something.
Well, he's got products
and
that are related to that.
and I think that's a big part of it. But I actually think a lot of this comes from Messiah complex. They can start getting these big followings, and everybody starts telling them they're great. Mm-hmm. And they want to do more clickbait. They love feeling great. They love, and they genuinely feel they're helping people on some level. And I think there's a lot of bad actors out there. I could name some. I probably shouldn't. I regretted calling someone out on the High Performance podcast because it just got me a load of hate. There are some bad actors out there who generally want to manipulate people for their own financial gain. But I think some of them, on some level, come from what they see as a good place. They think they're genuinely helping people. Now, if we were to break down that, let's say you've got a following of 2 million and every day you're getting hundreds of people telling you how great you are. That's going to make you feel good and you're going to want to produce more content. But that's actually quite a very small percentage. Now, I'm not saying you aren't helping more people than that, but it's a very one-dimensional approach. Now, let's say you're following someone. You've used Paul Saladino as an example. Let's say you followed Paul Saladino. You were previously feeling crap, right? You followed him. You start exercising. Paul looks good, right? He's in great shape.
Absolutely.
He's in great, full of energy, and you start following his dietary ways, and then you feel great. Well, you're going to want to tell everyone. I found the solution. I felt crap. I want to tell everyone. So I get it. Well, some of these people. And you start getting in shape. Maybe you'll go onto social media and create content with your shirt off outside, looking all tough and everything like that. Chewing on a raw steak, drinking raw milk, and it's it's very clickbaity and it's positive. And this is maybe why I don't have a very big following. I'm struggling to get my following up because I'm trying. For a start, I don't have a single audience. I talk about anything. I talk about the history of breakfast. Yes. Then cravings, neuroscience of cravings. Maybe I'll talk about a recent study. I might talk about certain aspects of the scientific method. I might talk about the history of lunch, the etymology of the word lunch. Yeah. It's really anything that I find interesting. Yep. And am I doing it clickbait? I try not to. Maybe some I do because you have to use, like you said, the first 4 or 5 seconds.
Unfortunately, sometimes you need a hook to buy. Sometimes you market what people think they need, then educate them on what they really need.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. So this absolutist thinking that you describe, it concerns me because people we take in small bites of information, and I mentioned a while ago about the full critical appraisal of the evidence. Who does that apart from academics or nerds, right? And I haven't done a full on many topics. I've done it on a few topics. The seed oils one, for instance, the ultra processed food. I have done a critical appraisal of the evidence to what I see is a very thorough level. But if I was going to do something that was genuinely drastic to mess with my health, look at like the carnivore diet, I would do a full critical appraisal. Now, people don't have the skills to look at epidemiology or randomized control trials or meta-analyses and look at things like forest plots, and I'm throwing names around here deliberately to show that people don't understand them, right? Even when I graduated uni, I didn't have those skills. I've learnt them moving forward. I've tried to educate myself in biostatistics, so I've got a bit of an understanding, so I can critically appraise a particular study. And this is the other thing, and this is where people like Paul Saladino I really find worrying, because for a start, he's an MD, he's not a PhD. He's trained to counsel people on the individual level, not as a researcher. Now, I want to caveat that, there's some brilliant MDs out there that do know how to critically appraise evidence and do a great job. But they're not necessarily trained in that way or as part of it. So, and he'll make a claim and he'll pull out a study to back up his claim. One study. It's called cherry picking, right? We can all do that. You can find studies to back up your evidence, and usually they're mechanistic data. And this is an interesting one, right? So mechanistic data will show some physiological process whereby you eat some food that contains, say, a compound, and this chain of events happened and it shows this outcome. And this is, the seed oils and inflammation is a big one here. People are saying seed oils are toxic at the moment. And they can produce a study that shows a mechanism where having one of the fatty acids in seed oils causes inflammation. It's pro-inflammatory. But there's also multiple other studies showing different mechanistic pathways where they're shown anti-inflammatory. Now, we're not concerned with one mechanism. We're concerned with outcomes. We want to know that, say, an inflammatory marker, the totality of inflammatory marker, it isn't a problem. And this is where people misrepresent science. So people like Paul Saladino and Gary Brecker, he was the one I called out on the High Performance podcast, this is what they do. And you can argue they are, to some extent, scientifically trained and should know better, where you've got the Eddie Abus of the world who don't know any better, and putting out their very dangerous content, but more from a point of view of shunning science. And so which is worse? I can't make up my mind. Is it worse that someone completely shuns science for pure ideology, or is it somebody who purposely misrepresents science for their own ideology? Either way, it's ideological. In fact, there's a term I invent in chapter 3 called dietology.
What is that?
It's a portmanteau, a link of word of diet and ideology. Okay. And you can think about it. You see all these people on social media, so they've got Kirk the Carnivore as their handle because their ideology is their diet, or Keto Kirk, or Vegan James, or that's got a ring to it, hasn't it? Keto Kirk, that's his new name. But the type of diet they're following becomes their very identity. And for some level, I get this, and this is something I want to explore in the future. If I do a follow-up book, it might be called Dietology, and I want to look at the problems with why people are so ideologically committed to the food choices they make. Why is it so important to them? And I want to look at it from the aspects we've spoken about, but also our beliefs in food. Let's look at the word culture. Okay, this is an interesting word. We use the word so much these days. We talk about a culture associated with maybe we behave, maybe how we talk, how we dance, how we dress, a culture of a certain country. More recently, we use culture in the term of a business or another institution. An institution has a certain culture. Look, have you ever looked at the etymology of the word, where the word originates from? It comes from the tilling of the land for food, the acquisition of food from the land. Think about the word cultivate, which sounds very similar, right? And agriculture, well, agri means field, so it's food from a field. So the very word culture is actually linked to food. Now, this helps demonstrate possibly why we're so ideologically committed to food, because it's so important to us. Food is culture. And I think that's really important that people sort of acknowledge that, how important that word is. A very essence of the way we feel, the way we behave, and the food choices we have are immersed in culture. And we know there's different food cultures.
Well, we know that to be true. And look, I coach people from a magnitude of different cultures and backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds. And there are distinct things that all of these people do and have habitually done that have been part of the identity of the culture they've been brought up in. So,
and you have to embrace that.
And the more that's been conditioned over the time, which comes back to your point, half an hour ago, James, about lazy coaching or lazy information is just don't do that, just don't eat that. What if that's a part of your culture? We need to find the balance here.
We've got to find a balance, absolutely. And that actually, some of these changes occur on the physiological level. Some of these from food choices have been shown. An extreme example of that would be, let's compare two extremes, a Sri Lankan and a Norwegian. Okay, you can probably guess where I'm going with this. Super spicy foods from Sri Lanka, right? They were there for traditionally for reasons to help food preservation and also to reduce the incidence of gastrointestinal pathogens from food poisoning, basically. And we know these foods have a protective effect and an antimicrobial effect. So you put some kid who's brought up in Sri Lanka, they're given these ultra spicy foods from birth. The physiological changes will happen, as well as psychological changes, to tolerate these foods. Now, you put some Norwegian adult who's never had a spicy food, put them in Sri Lanka on that ultra spicy diet, their mouth ain't going to be the only thing on fire. Right? And of course there can be some sort of adaptation if that individual, that Norwegian adult was fed these foods well, on some level they would adapt. But it would never be as good.
It can't be drastic, James. It can't be drastic. You can't go from one extreme to the other. From my experience, look, you're far more knowledgeable on this subject than I am, but I've also got a lot of evidence with hundreds and if not thousands of clients that we've worked with, that when someone has habitually eaten a certain way, and then you just go flip it totally and have this one-dimensional approach, certainly with a diet with a name on it.
And this is what some of them, like the Eddie Abus of the world, they demonise oats and they demonise rice. I mean, rice is a traditional food from certain Eastern cultures, and oats for some Western ones. Why? Because they've got it in their head, and this is why the eat real food thing. What the hell does it mean?
Well, okay. Again, I'd love you to unpack that, because that's something I do say, James. And I'm a big fan of real food. That I genuinely think, and again, I'd love your opinion and challenge me. I love your. I genuinely think if the world was educated more on the importance of real, non-processed, minimal refined sugar food, they'd generally control their weight better, they'd have more energy, they're generally going to look and feel better.
Okay.
And I've got evidence with my clientele that if I look at all of the pool of clients, and we do stats and data with every single client we work with, why do they change? Why does that person drop weight, feel better, live with more energy? What does that group, if I look at purely food, forget all the other core drivers, the people who progress faster, generally feel better, perform better, they eat less processed food and less refined sugar.
And I'm sure there's some truth to that, because some of those foods are they're more satiating, more fibre rich, possibly more protein rich.
So
they're
absolutely.
more satiating, so they're less likely to have to consume a vast amount of food. So it will come down to the fact that it's very nutrient dense, but also more satiating, and just they're more likely to make better food choices because.
And less likely to overeat.
Less likely to overeat. Yeah. But is that purely because the food is real food or unprocessed? I'm not sure. So we have, look, I've spoke about the problems of the food system, and I try and take a very futuristic view here. People have called me a futurist with food. There's some really cool technologies that are coming along, and they're technologies. So let's look. Have you heard of the cellular agriculture space? Say the lab-grown meat. You may have heard of the term lab-grown meat. Yeah. Right. These technologies are making actual meat cells that are grown in a, for want of a better term, laboratory setting. I hate the term lab-grown meat, by the way. Okay. People want to call it clean meat or cultured meat or something like that.
Okay.
It's identically the same as actual meat. Okay. Now it's probably, we haven't got enough time to go into the depths of how these foods are created, but we've got very questionable ethical farming practices of intensive farming, the way animals are treated. Now, I'm not against killing animals for food, but I am very against some of the intensive farming methods that are used in the West. Okay. Yep. Because we want meat, we want cheap meat. So if there's another way of producing cheap meat that tastes the same, is possibly even more nutritious because it hasn't got some of the antibiotics that the animals are treated with, because it's in an ultra clean environment. Yeah. And it will ultimately, at the moment, it's much more expensive, but when economies of scale kick in 5 to 10 years, only 5 to 10 years, then some of these technologies will be cheaper, the alternative. I'm massively for these. Now, people are going, I don't want meat that's grown in a lab. I want it from real food. Well, you're getting it from intensive farm at the moment, mate, and arguably is that real food? So this is where I'm coming into the term real food. Is a burger from a intensively farmed pig or cow, is that real food?
When it's been
I'm not answering that question.
I get it.
I'm not answering the question. I'm asking the question, right? Is that real food? Okay. Now, the other thing is, of course, you might get some of these influencers that say the food has changed over the hundreds of years from what it, because we've made our bananas less pippy. I don't know if you've seen the pictures of the old bananas. They used to be much more, the seeds in a banana, we hardly see them now. You can vaguely see them when you cut a banana open, but they used to be a lot bigger, right? And watermelons, right? Succulent. Oh, I love watermelon, right? They were mostly seedy with a tiny bit of flesh, but through years of breeding, for decades of breeding, we've made them more fleshy and more, we like them more. Now, some people, that's not real food anymore because we've changed that. This is not GMO. It's not. This is selective breeding and hybridization and stuff, which is another topic we can talk about. But it's so where does the real food thing come in?
You're basically saying, which I totally understand and I'm all for. It's a bit of a blanket statement, because you can have real food that doesn't have the additives in, etc. But it's been fucked around with, to put it bluntly. Before it hits the shelves,
and that's okay. I'm not, let's talk about ultra processing.
Yes, please.
So people will use this term. I'm betting you 5 or 6 years ago, you hadn't heard the term. If you had, it hadn't really registered, and you weren't using it.
Possibly.
Yeah. Well, I've asked a lot of people, and some people listen to that. They might go, "Yeah, I hadn't." Right? Where does it come from? It's from high-profile academics going on high-profile podcasts using the term flippantly. What does the term even mean? Okay, it comes from, in 2009, it's believed the first use was. And the famous paper writing about this so-called Nova categorization of food came out in 2011 from a team at the University of Sao Paulo, led by Professor Carlos Montenegro, all done in good faith. And because prior to that, there was a concern that this concept of nutritionism, where there's a very much focused on the nutrient content of the food rather than the food itself. And we've spoke about how important it is to buy foods and share it with others. And we should be getting away from that. And I'm quite on board with that. I think it makes sense. We should be well aware of the nutrient content of food, the nutricentric view, but let's not focus too much on it in food policy and the way we view stuff. So they instead we'll create a categorization of four of the way food is processed into four categories. The first one is so-called more minimally processed food. So this would be things like cooking food, chopping food, mixing foods together. Okay, that's Nova 1. Nova 2 is the processed calorie ingredients. So things like salts and spices and sauces that you can mix with food groups from food 1 to make meals. Group 3 are more traditionally processed foods, so like homemade bread, homemade cake, with a few ingredients, but generally these foods had a shorter shelf life. Homemade pies, these are things that our grandparents made and things like that. Then group 4 was the so-called ultra-processing food. Now, the definitions of this, in fact, there isn't one, but what people generally take it to mean is it's got multiple ingredients, at least one of those ingredients couldn't be something you'd have in a regular kitchen or could easily buy from a regular shop. The technologies involved would probably involve more than you could do at home unless you got some fandangled processing equipment.
Yep.
But also, some people say that these ultra-processed food will be making a nutritional health claim on the packet, like low fat, high fibre, healthy heart,
yep,
stuff like that, low calorie,
yep,
anything like that. Mm-hmm. Now, most of my academic peers and respected nutritionist, dietitian peers would all agree with me here. In fact, everyone would agree. The term hasn't been given a formal definition. Its original 2011 definition has been traced to change through different epidemiology research papers up till today. In fact, there has been one professor who's actually traced in different papers how the definition's changed. So they will agree that the term lacks a firm definition, yet they'll go on in the next sentence to use the term ultra-processed food, which is why I try not to use it, because I don't like to use words that I don't know the meaning of. Okay, so this is the problem we've got. We've got a problem of language as much as we have a problem of nutrition science here. Now, let's use some examples of foods here. Nestle shredded wheat, right? 100% whole wheat. Even if you're the biggest Nova fan of the definition, you would agree that's a Nova 3, not a Nova 4. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Agreed.
Weetabix has got some added vitamins and iron. They make a big thing about it. So that, by definition, would be a Nova 4. Mm-hmm. Both of them are high fibre, nutritious gems, okay? We've got a fibre crisis. Now, I would much rather people be having Weetabix than sugar-coated Frosties and things like that because of the fibre. There's no fibre in Frosties and they're high in sugar. So we've got a low glycemic meal when it's prepared with milk that we should be pushing. Then what about baked beans and tomato sauce, a British staple? Okay.
Yeah, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, they would be. It's high fibre and it's nutrition. It's convenient and cheap.
But it's refined sugar. A lot of
refined
sugar.
But the glycemic index and the glycemic load of baked beans is quite low. How's that going to impact the body in an adverse way? Yeah, it's an ultra-processed food. We've got a fibre crisis. People aren't having enough fibre. Let's encourage ways that we can get it in. 2011 statistics here, British Nutrition Foundation found that only 9% of UK adults are meeting the recommended daily amounts of fibre. Only 9%.
Why is that so important to someone who? Because I've got clients like this who they know the macros of protein and carbs and fats, but
Well, fibre is important. One, for a healthy digestive system. The microbiome we've touched on briefly. And we know, for instance, that a healthy microbiome is associated with better mental health, but also better cognition and focus. And that's the sort of thing that your demographics are going to listen to. And we know this. Why? Well, people may have heard of serotonin, the neurotransmitter hormone serotonin. And it's associated with positive thinking, feeling good and feeling happiness. People call it the happy hormone, don't they? I actually have a chemical symbol of it on my wall in my office. But do people know that actually 90 to 95% of serotonin isn't released in the brain at all? It's actually released in the enteric nervous system. That's the nervous system of the gut. And it's been linked to having a healthy microbiome. So if you have a healthy microbiome, you're more likely to release more serotonin. Okay, that's interesting. Isn't that telling us that healthy microbiome may make us feel happier as well as focused? Possibly.
And if you feel happy, you're generally going to make better decisions.
And what encourages a healthy microbiome? Well, a good intake of soluble fibre, which is from like fruits and legumes and oats and things like that, but also some of the polyphenols, the good stuff from plants, that again from plants. So a plant-rich diet has been associated with a healthy microbiome, study after study. have demonstrated this, and has shown with better cognition and positive thinking, as well as the omega-3s that also play into cognition as well. So let's bring it back to where I was talking about ultra-processed food. I've given one example there of why we need, why we should be encouraging the fibre. Now let's spin it the other way. Let's talk about foods that would fall into an over 3, not an over 4, that are probably a bit questionable. You go down one of the shops down there, you can pick up two types of ready salted crisps. Your, let's say, Walkers and your Kettle crisps. Okay? Now, one of the other attributes of people say of ultra-processed foods is their hyperpalatability. People can eat them just bang, can eat large amounts.
Yep.
I quite like Kettle crisps.
They're tremendous.
I can bang through packet after packet of them. Yet they would be Nova 3. Walkers would be Nova 4.
Okay.
Fish and chips down the chippy, another British staple. That could be made in the kitchen, right? With all the ingredients. Nova 3. Now we know I'm not demonising fish and chips. I love them, right? But the point I'm trying to make here is that's not an ultra processed food. That's an Nova 3. That's a normal processed food that could be made traditionally. The definition is already falling down, and that's the point I'm trying to make. Is we try to use definitions and pigeonhole things. Now, the more astute are going to be sitting back listening to this and going, "Oh, cool! I know why this guy's doing that. He makes Huel, isn't Huel a Nova 4?"
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. Well, I can't help that. I didn't come up with a definition. I didn't put Huel in that little box. What we have here is we spoke about, obviously a fan of it. You've had 2 for breakfast. We spoke about how Huel is a good plan B. It's high fibre, highly nutritious. Well, it's an ultra-processed food. So what? What about bread? What about wholemeal breads and granary breads? They're called ultra-processed foods. In fact, what about that study from the Lancet in November 2023 that agreed with all the other research that said diets that are typically high in ultra-processed food are associated with high risk of non-communicable diseases, chronic diseases. Okay, epidemiology, but still agreed with them all. However, when this meta-analysis broke foods down into different food groups, like so-called ultra-processed breads and so-called ultra-processed alternative to meats, were actually associated with lower risk of chronic disease. The definition is already breaking down. What about, there's the other study from last year, 2024, in America. It was an American study, and a group of researchers managed to make a diet that was 80% ultra-processed food that met all the healthy eating guidelines. High fibre, all the vitamins and minerals, low fat, associated good amount of omega-3s. Yet they did it have ultra-processed foods. So what I'm questioning here, Kirk, is this position of labelling. We seem to have created a box, which is all nice, tidy box, with everything that's ultra-processed food, rubber stamp bad on it.
But what you're saying is, again, in layman's terms for anyone listening, is that there's a deeper context to how actually processed something is. You've just mentioned there that I have Huel, certainly when I'm in London. It's very convenient for me. Look, if I was at home and my lifestyle allowed me to prep every meal, and which it doesn't anymore, would I rather do that? Full transparency, than to have Huel? Yes. But if I'm not having a Huel on the go, then I'm only going to choose something when I'm hungry, which is nowhere near as nutritionally.
It could be a white bread sandwich with a bag of crisps. And
exactly,
soft drink.
because the hunger problem isn't going to go away anywhere. I still need to eat,
and you need to nourish yourself for your exercise sessions and to keep yourself focused.
Exactly, and that's what I'm trying to say. But surely, just to wrap up the processing, because I know it's such a big subject, it's always that it depends. How much you actually have, and surely the KPI as to whether or not you're eating too much processed food, too much sugar, is how healthy are you? How are your bloods? How do you look? How do you feel?
Let's just not just. I want to get people rid of the labels. That's what I want to get. I want to change the language. I mean, it's too late now. Language is evolved. But I say bring back junk food. Okay, bring back the term junk food. And there's a lot wrong with the term junk food. There's a kind of one thing I do like about it is a kind of playfulness with it. We know these foods aren't highly nutritious, right? We know that I've had all my good stuff, now a little bit of junk. Okay, that's, as part of my diet. The 80-20 rule, say, for instance. I use that term arbitrarily, of course, but I'm saying the term is imperfect, and advocates of the term ultra-processed food say the fact they've tried to make a definition out of it, I'd say that's where it fails. I'd say it's the very looseness of the language. To quote, I try and be one of those smart people that quotes philosophers. 20th century philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, the limits of my language are the limits of my world. Let's not limit our language. Let's embrace nuance. So it's the phrasing of it. Let's stop using the term ultra-processed food. Because some ultra-processed foods were shown to be beneficial for our health. It's all very well going back to pre-1960s, but we've got environmental problems, we've got ethical problems, we've got people aren't having enough fibre. We need to embrace the new technologies. It's the point I'm trying to make in it, but in the right way. But these fabulous technologies have been used predominantly in the wrong way. We have the ability to fix the food system. This is what's so frustrating. We have the ability to fix the food system and make foods for individuals, wherever you sit on the socioeconomic scale, can be more nutritious for us. The why I'm a big fan of this, of going back to sort of making meals, is the community aspect.
Tell me more about that.
So we sit down and enjoy meals, concept of meals, all right? Let me give you a little story here. I think people are going to like this one. Something known as the Rosito effect. Okay, 1950s America. There's a town in Pennsylvania, USA, called Rosito, and the local physician noticed that people weren't getting heart disease and strokes. In fact, there hadn't been one incidence. I think it was under 70 years old. There hadn't been one incidence of anyone with heart disease or strokes. But yet, the surrounding towns nearby, people. This was the 1950s when America was soaring, and people were trying to live the fast life, and heart disease was going up, but it wasn't happening in Rosito. So they looked at it, why it was. Well, there's a mine nearby. There was a factory, people working grueling hours. People were smoking, drinking, eating quite sugary foods. But their ancestry was from an Italian town called Rosito Valteforte, and they'd come over in the late 1800s and brought the traditions with them. The tradition was community, sharing food. Everybody prepared food together. Families ate, twice a day where they could, together, and at weekends there were big social occasions. The whole village was tended for by the people. There was dance classes. The flower borders across the town. Everybody looked after. Community focused. That's only half the story. Let me tell you what happened then. 10, 15 years later, when the younger kids had got the fast cars, done a bit of money, soaring off, first fast food joint grew up in Rosito. The community focus was gone, and what happened? The incidence of non-communicable disease, heart disease and stroke, caught up with the surrounding towns. That's known as the Rosito effect, and it's quite well publicised. So that demonstrates, because they've kind of controlled to some degree for the bad food choices and the smoking and the working long hours, and put it down to community. There's some really other cool work more recently. So there's a concept called behavioural synchrony. So you might have heard this one, that there's some research done maybe 15, 20 years ago when a rowing team are training together in the gym as with their teammates. They train harder than when they're training individual in the gym or with other people, because there's kind of synchrony that's built into them training as a team, even though they're not going, doing the reps in unison. They're just on the machines at roughly the same time.
It's the emotional impact.
Yeah, emotional impact. Now,
influence.
This has been explored around the dinner table as well, this behavioural synchrony, that there has been certain hormones associated with positive feeling that are released when people eat meals together. And this is put down to the synchrony again, like we're sharing food together. Now, it's not like we all sit down the meal and someone says, 1, 2, 3, go, and we chew in unison. It's not like that. But roughly speaking, you're starting your meal at the same time. You're finishing at the same time. You're sharing your food. There's more than that as well. You're sharing your experiences of the day. You want to unpack.
You're being present.
You're talking about maybe the bad things that happen in the day, and you're sharing that and you're offloading, or you're sharing the good experiences and everybody feels good. But you're making better food choices, because you're more likely to, if you're preparing food for other people, you're more likely to prepare more healthful food and not overeat, because there's a kind of social consequence of being judged. I don't care about that one, but some people don't.
What you're saying about you can remove a part of the risk of the secret eater. When you're just by yourself, most people self-sabotage to excess with hyperpalatable food when they're by themselves.
So where I'm going with this is, it's the sharing of food bit, the community eating bit, that I really want people to focus on, not whether it's so-called ultra-processed food or not. I didn't come up with these definitions, and I'm certainly not on board with them. And as more and more research is showing that it's flawed, I'm not saying there isn't a place for the term ultra-processed food. There absolutely is, but I think the term should stay in academia. It shouldn't. I'm very annoyed that high-profile academics have gone onto high-profile podcasts and used the term, and now everybody's using it and don't really know what it means.
Amazing. We've still got time, to squeeze a lot more out of you. Don't worry. And you may have covered this, but I want to make sure we close the loop on this. You speak a lot about ethics
Mhm.
Tell me more about that. What
Okay,
do you mean by ethics?
One of the pillars, the fourth pillar of contemplative nutrition, is the ethics of our food system. I talk about human rights a bit there. That I cover that. It's not an area I'm hugely well versed in.
Yep.
But there's companies should be quite transparent about their supply chains. So we are doing everything they can to minimise the risk of humans being exploited in the supply of any ingredients. Now, we've got a complicated product with loads of different ingredients, and some of those ingredients, what's known as compound ingredients, which means the ingredient itself is made up of 2 or 3 ingredients. So we've got to try and trace back the supply chain right from farmer all through supply to production and make sure no humans being exploited. It's complicated, but people are doing this, and companies these days should publish a modern day slavery statement on their website, and you look at it and most companies have got them, and that's really good. Is it 100%? Probably not, because we know that people are being exploited. And then there's the big quandary of, should you buy from countries like Bangladesh, where we know there's working conditions and people aren't getting a living wage? Because if you don't buy from them, they're not going to get any wage. And it's a conundrum, and I don't wish to answer the questions, but if you don't put the pressure on these countries to sort things out, then they're never going to get better. But what I do talk a lot more about is animal ethics. So I try and take a sort of utilitarian consequentialist perspective on this, and by that I mean our actions, how they affect others. And I spoke about meat eating and the impact on the environment. I'm not convinced by the vegan argument that we should be completely avoid animal products.
Why?
Now I have a big full-on argument with myself in the last chapter on this, and I call it "To Vegan or Not to Vegan." That is the question, and it's one of the last sections in the last chapter. And I try and argue the point from a physiological perspective, an anthropological perspective, and even a philosophical perspective. So how does it affect our physiologies? Can we survive healthily without meat? Yeah, we can, but yet we crave meat. And we wouldn't be here today if we hadn't had meat in the past. We wouldn't have these big brains and small digestive systems. So we shouldn't ignore that. We shouldn't ignore the history of meat. But what about a philosophical perspective? Well, we know that we're exploiting animals, but are we exploiting animals? Well, one thing I am certain about is, two things I'm certain about. One is we should be eating less meat and animal products, and the other one is we should be doing everything we can to do away with inhumane, intensive animal farming. Now, that term is inhumane, ethics. What does intensive even mean? These terms maybe lack a definition that's accepted. What I deem as ethical, you might have a different opinion on. I think broadly speaking, we're probably from a similar place. Yeah. But some people have no trouble ethically with this way animals are treated and slaughtered. Now, there are certain practices we can put in place. I cite some of the way animals are slaughtered, cows are slaughtered in America by this fascinating lady called Temple Grandin. In fact, there's a film on Amazon about her, played by Claire Danes, about her lifestyle. She was autistic, and she came up with this method that cows are led to their slaughter, that they don't have to be stressed while doing so. It's a really good film, actually. And I do briefly cover that in the book, but are there ways that we can treat animals more humanely? There are certain meats that I just will never eat. I think veal and foie gras, I think there's just literally no need for them. You could argue that veal was actually less nutritional because it's got less iron than a regular mixed animal product, and yet it's so inhumane. There's literally, other than wanting to, there's literally no good reason. I'm not, is there no reason you can't enjoy a steak just as much as a bit of veal?
I totally agree. Yeah.
So we should be looking at the way, free range farming. What does that term even mean? So I can see no moral problem with proper free range eggs, because chickens have been bred to produce eggs. If they're leading a proper free ranging, I don't mean when they're crammed into a big barn with a minimal access. I mean proper free ranging where but they're also kept safe from predators. I can see no moral argument with that, and that's the reason if there's one food I can never see me avoiding, would be free eggs. I think I'll always have eggs. Yeah. Can I see myself in the future cutting out meat? Oh, I don't know. I think maybe when the cellular ag space gets going and the cultured meat.
Yeah, what you said earlier.
I can say possibly. I can't say that, but I can cut down on meat. I try and eat plant-based more often. Now, there might be people that disagree on my view of thinking here, and I go into a lot more depth in how I arrive at my ideas of what I deem as ethical. People might disagree with them, but I think if anyone does disagree with them, they should have a very strong argument of why, and not just give me some of the straw man arguments I get on social media for this.
So for someone who wants to know exactly, James, like you said there, protein and you've had less meat, what's a typical day's protein or week's protein sources look like for you?
I don't count any macros.
No, not about macros, but I'm on about just like the types of protein
So
you have.
what I've done is I try and cut my animal-derived calories down to about 10%. So I don't walk around with a latest tracking app or anything like that. But what that means is I go some days without having any or minimal animals. I might have a little bit of grass-fed butter on my toast. That'd be literally the only animal calories I'll have. And that can be several days in a row. I mean, I have the advantage, I have Huel, and I get my Huel for free, so it makes life a lot easier. But I do typically do the intermittent fasting. I don't eat till lunchtime. I don't see any unique health benefits from doing that over and above a normal calorie restriction, but I like it because something less to worry about in the morning, and it keeps me more cognitive focused, especially if I'm doing a podcast like this and I want to be sharp. And it's a good way for some people to control how much they eat.
Manipulate their calories till later in the day. I couldn't agree more.
And it works for some, not for others. I do that. I will then I do eat quite a lot. I'm fortunate now I do a lot of exercise. I've been training for a lot of years. I do a bit of running now as well, which I don't enjoy, but I do it. And so I burn it off quite well. So I can eat quite a lot, but I don't control my portions or anything. And I'm not saying other people shouldn't.
Did you have more fish?
I do have fish probably a couple of times a week. But I get my omega-3s. Huel is high in omega-3s. I do also sometimes supplement with an omega-3 oil, algae-derived one, vegan one. Not every day, because if I had plenty of Huel, I wouldn't bother. But I have it present, and because it's not something you have to have every day. Over the course of a week, having a good amount will be plenty, because it builds up more slowly. There's literally no pattern, Kirk. It's really hard for me to answer. I eat out quite a lot.
Yeah, chickpea, that's what I'm saying. But your protein sources when you're eating out.
When I'm eating out, if there's a good vegan option on there, I'll probably go for it.
Yeah.
Because I'm privileged enough to have the pleasure of eating out. Yeah. Is it really important to me that I maximise my hedonism and have something that's got to taste the best? Well, no, because I end up enjoying it anyway. If you've got a good chef, they'll make some really good plant-based foods. At home, my wife makes some really good plant-based stews. And also a good way of using up food that's in the fridge. So you're minimising food waste and saving money. You've got some veg that's in there for a few days, and it's probably on the, leave it another day, it's probably going to go bad. We'll chuck it in a stew with. And I'll tell you what a good kitchen staple, a couple of good kitchen staples are tins of pulses or jars of pulses, and vegetable stock cubes. So much with vegetable stock cubes, you can put them into anything and make things that taste bland into really nice. Are cheap and convenient. Just always have them in your cupboard.
Yeah. Cool. Like, last few questions. I've got to get these in, mate. Most people struggle with consistency. What's the one nutrition habit that you feel people can get right? Or, sorry, what's the one, rephrase that. Most people struggle with consistency. What's the one nutrition habit that you feel healthier people generally do that people who aren't as healthy, struggle with their weight, don't do, from your experience?
That's a question.
I know it's open-ended, but is there anything, like, have you been in this game for 30 years?
I think
some people are consistent, some people are not.
I think trying to be regular with meals is helpful. Preparing meals, planning both meals and shopping. So you're not buying things on the fly.
But what happens if your lifestyle, I've got clients who their lifestyle is on that, but the forward planning still comes into play.
Then know that you're probably going to get caught short and either take a small pack up with you. I think nuts and seeds are great, nuts, seeds and fruit, because they're nutrient dense, filling, and you can put them in a little container and carry them around with you. Or know where your shop's going to have Huel available. A good one.
Yeah. And then if you had unlimited power for one day to change the food system, what would you do first? You had unlimited power. What do you think is the first port of call that
It would be to try and it would be for one day. This is the one day thing that's getting me because.
Or just the first thing you think is a primary. Forget
the biggest problem is polarization and absolutist thinking and misinformation.
So it's a mentality shift.
It's a mentality shifting, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, biggest thing for me because that if you solve that, everything else cascades down. You can make sure people are having good evidence-based information and the good faith practitioners is giving it, not without nuance. We can embrace nuance, but embrace nuance in the right way.
And I've just got some quick rapid-fire questions. I want the first word or first sentence that comes to mind.
Hate these.
Biggest nutrition lie you wish would die today?
Seed oils are inherently toxic.
Okay. Most overrated and underrated food for health. So most overrated food for health. What comes to mind?
Food. Overrated food for health. I don't think is it more of a collection of like some of these wellness supplements that might have minimal benefit and literally are very expensive and you haven't got the fundamentals sorted. So I'm not sure there's one thing there.
Yep.
Underrated?
Yeah, underrated.
Well, nutrient fibre.
Wow.
No. I'll tell you something, you go into gym and people talk about how much protein you had, bro.
Correct.
Nobody ever says how much fibre you had, bro. It's just never going to be a thing. Let's make fibre macho.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. One piece of nutrition advice you personally follow religiously. What is your one thing?
A plant-rich diet.
Okay. And if you could put one message on a billboard for the world to see about food, what would it say?
Your food choices, the food choices you make are bigger than yourself.
Love it. And why should people buy, or at least explore buying, the Well-Fed book?
Because I try and embrace complexity. If there's one takeaway that there should be lots of takeaways people get from that, but I've tried to put a synergy between multiple things. There's one takeaway people should just embrace the fact that the food system is complex and that can be good. But it needn't be complicated. While it's complex, it needn't be complicated. One phrase I use in there is nutrition science isn't rocket science. We all know what we should and shouldn't be eating, fundamentally, broadly.
Brilliant. And then where can people get the book?
The book's available on all major booksellers like Waterstones, Amazon, etc. People want to follow me. I'm on Instagram, James Collier, RNUTR. LinkedIn's a big one for me as well. And also Substacks, where I publish my articles. Everything there's free. It's where I sort of make my thoughts into something. I write on Substack because there's a lot going on up there. And if I want to write something, want to make sense of it, I write an article. But you can't just write it. You have to publish it because you're going to be criticised or commit to publishing. So I do a lot on Substack as well.
Yeah, and that's one thing I'll say, James. I've known you a long time. If there's one thing, whether people agree with you or not, is that the passion is there for all to see, and you're not scared to say something, even if it doesn't please the masses. Because I think there's so much generic bullshit that just isn't really helping people.
Yeah, and the only caveat to that is I try and do that and back up what I say.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got to be able to back up.
Yeah,
and I'm open to be criticised. Right? I will debate anybody.
Yeah.
But please be armed with good information if you're going to debate me.
Yeah, absolutely. James, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for making this happen.
Pleasure.
And please check James out. He's a dear friend of mine and he's helped me a lot in the industry too. And I'll see you next time.